And now we welcome Manya Brachear. Manya, we know that in Chicago, we're really very fortunate, but in a minority in that we have a strong newspaper that has a religion reporter covering that beat. Can you tell us something about your life as a reporter and you know, what a week looks like for you?
Yeah, or the day-to-day, I guess we're curious about. We saw the kind of the overview there and how you were inspired, but how do you go deeper into the capital T?
What are you doing in that cubicle?
Yeah. Well, you know, no offense to my colleagues who cover cops or transportation or other beats, but on the religion beat, I feel like I wake up every morning and try to figure out ways to go deeper, to try to get to the why. What motivates the people that I might have talked to the day before? What really is behind that? And try to explain that to readers. And you know, of course, I do breaking news. There's breaking news, especially in Chicago, on the religion beat, where religion is practically just like covering politics or sports. There are breaking news stories that you have to jump on and turn around quickly. But I really try to focus every day on one particular story and just, you know, really try to explore something in depth.
So on a practical level, you and I have conversations in my other role at IFYC to try to give you information that might be of interest for a story that you're working on. You have to vet things in a certain way, right? You work with an editor, you don't get to write anything you want, and you have certain criteria that you're looking for. So I don't want to be too inside baseball here, but maybe for folks that are watching, how does that work for you? You know, I mean,
you know, I'm fortunate in that my editor actually gives me a lot of autonomy because I'm a specialist, right? I'm a religion reporter, and nobody else in the newsroom wants that job.
Well, why is that though? Why?
You know, it's a touchy, sensitive topic. I think Hussein mentioned in his segment that, you know, there are two things you don't talk about: religion and politics. I would add baseball to that. In Chicago especially. But yeah, nobody wants to talk about religion, and so on one level of my job is to get people to talk about it. First, you have to get people to actually break down that barrier and talk, and then really talk honestly and really try to explain their thoughts to you. People just don't particularly want that job, especially if they don't have a religious background of their own. They might not get it necessarily. And so, yeah, so they don't typically. Religion writing is just not a really coveted beat in the newsroom. People are really glad that I've taken it on.
I mean, we live in the most dynamic time where things are happening in the name of religion around the country and around the world. So I would think, I mean, you're one of the privileged few in a major market to have a great job. You want to talk a little bit about some of your colleagues or how you've seen this kind of shrink a little bit. How important is it to have someone covering religion in a market to address and be able to pivot off these current events like you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's important no matter what size market you're in. Religion is a motivator, it's a driver of people across this country, around this globe. And so I think having someone in a newsroom who understands religion, who gets it, who doesn't mind having those sensitive, touchy conversations, I think that's very important. It's important for different reasons, though, depending on the market. There are smaller markets where people are very insular, where they understand their religion quite well, but they don't understand others, or they're very stubborn and they don't want to understand others. And so they need a reporter for their local media organization, newspaper, television stations, you name it, who can try to get them to understand, who can explain those types of things to them. In Chicago, religion is such a player. I mean, it's such a part of the landscape here, and it's so incredibly diverse. And so I think it's important to have a religion reporter in the newsroom who's on top of what's happened in Chicago.
So Manya, it used to be in the Chicago Tribune, there was a religion page or religion section, and you'd go there for the information on that, and if you didn't want to hear about it, you could avoid it. Now we don't have one. What happened?
Right. So, you know, like a lot of major newspapers are cutting their religion writer. Fortunately, the Tribune kept a religion writer on staff, but they did cut the religion section in terms of, you know, that was one way in which it redesigned and downsized. I actually wasn't all that disappointed. I thought that the people who read that religion page, it was kind of like preaching to the choir. They were the people who were interested in religion already, had a curiosity, a natural curiosity about other faiths and what other communities were doing. If they weren't interested in religion, if they were quite comfortable in their own viewpoints and didn't really want to learn much, they just didn't read the religion page. So I'm a big fan of integrating religion stories into the main pages of the newspaper, which is, of course, you know, now de facto what has to happen at the Tribune. And I'm a big fan of that because it gets people who are reading the news that they might ordinarily care about, and then all of a sudden they scan a religion headline and it's almost, you know,
That's fascinating, though, because I think you're suggesting, correct me if I'm wrong, that it used to be packaged in a very separate way. Right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're interested in religion, then here's where you find it.
Right, exactly.
And that was, in fact, a disservice in some ways because the integration wasn't happening for people. Do you think people are seeing the larger connects now? I mean, we're going to talk about some of the headlines that you're covering, you know. By that integration model, are people, again, I don't mean to get too in the weeds here, but are people seeing the connection between current events, world events, and the role that religion plays in that?
I think they are. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. But yeah, I think people who wouldn't ordinarily read religion stories are reading them. Sometimes I get notes from readers saying, "Why was this a story? Why did you write about this?" And I actually turn around and explain to them why I wrote about it, and this is why you should care about this. So I think it is reaching an audience that wouldn't ordinarily be reached, and I think hopefully that will increase over time.
So there seems to be in the country a group of people that are increasingly suspicious of religion in general and think that if we could remove religion from public discourse, we would remove, 80% of our conflict and the world's problems. And you saw some of this come out in the memorial celebration on the 10th anniversary of 9/11 when the religious community was not included in the memorial. What did you make of that question?
It's interesting. I just listened to what you just said, removing it from the public discourse. But that doesn't remove it from life here on Earth.
And everybody was talking about its absence.
Right. I think that, that when I watched that ceremony on Sunday morning, they did quote scripture. They did have some religious reflections in the ceremony, which actually surprised me. And I thought, well, what was all the fuss about? Because they have incorporated religion here into this ceremony. They didn't have religious clergy included in the ceremony. And I think that Mayor Bloomberg made the decision to let religious clergy do their own thing in their own environment and let this be a more universal type of secular, if you will, type of ceremony so that people weren't offended. Because there is a contingent out there that is not religious. They're, the atheists, agnostics, secularists, humanists, whatever they call themselves, they don't necessarily think God has or should play a role in the public square and in the public discourse. That doesn't mean they're not reflective, but it doesn't mean that religion has to be included in every public event. And I think that the way that was handled was actually pretty appropriate. They incorporated scripture. You could tune it in, you could tune it out, but they didn't offend any particular faith community that might have, where that might have been a risk.
So let's dive into the headlines a little bit, okay? I looked at the recent articles that you've written, and you are a Chicago reporter, so you're covering the Chicago scene, right? And I see some themes there. The Catholic Church, gay rights happening in the Muslim community. I mean, do you feel like you're constantly being pulled in those directions and trying to find an interesting personal angle in, right? I mean, good journalism is always about finding that interesting perspective, right?
Yeah.
Is it constraining to you, or is it just what the beat is, or I mean?
I appreciate constraints sometimes because the religious landscape here is so wide, and the number of stories I could do are just endless, and there are only 24 hours in a day. Sadly, I'm reminded every day. And so actually the constraints are kind of nice. When something happens in the news, okay, that's what I'm going to focus on, and I'm going to talk about where religion plays a role, how is it motivating here, and what, how it's integrated into this situation.
What's one of the surprising, interesting stories that you've covered in the religious landscape, one we may not have heard of?
The one that comes to mind is I would say after 9/11, or after the 10th anniversary, or I should say before the 10th anniversary, I went in search of Muslims in the Chicago area who were suffering just anxiety, nervousness. They were afraid that all of this horrible tension that surfaced right after 9/11 was gonna be stirred up again at the 10th anniversary. And I kind of went out in search of that because I wanted to illustrate that for readers. These people, again, as Hussein said, there were people who were victimized by 9/11, and there are people who are still victimized today. But and Ibu Patel, who guest hosts this show sometimes, he told me, you're not going to find it. You're going to find an amazing resilience in the Chicago, especially, Muslim community. And he was completely right. I found a filmmaker who had invested his own personal savings that he and his wife had put aside for a new house to make a film about fasting and football, and to explain this whole tradition of Ramadan and how these very all-American young men who played football in Dearborn, Michigan, observe that tradition of Ramadan, fast 30 days, and still practice football and play this all-American game. I found, just in the course of my reporting, Rahina Malik, who does the reflections on this show, a playwright who decided that she was going to tell Muslim stories on stage and has done so eloquently. It's that resilience that I think I found to be, quite honest, surprising, and that I think readers may have found surprising as well.
So Manya, you're on the front lines every day with this. Are you hopeful with what's going on? Because there's a lot of divisiveness out there, especially in the news. Love to play to those polar opposites, right? On a personal level and a professional level, we've got a couple seconds left. How would you answer that if I said, are you hopeful about what you're seeing?
I'm always hopeful. That's just a part of my nature. And I think that if people, yes, I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful for journalism because journalism is seeing some kind of tumultuous changes and sometimes disheartening changes. But yeah, I'm hopeful for the religion world as well, that people will read quality information, will soak it up, take it to heart, and behave.
Well, thank you so much for keeping us informed here in Chicago and for the work that you do.